This video, we're going to take a closer look at some things that I call traits and attributes of public opinion. Now, the traits of public opinion, I'm not going to spend any time talking about simply because your textbook author covers that in detail on page 255 and 256. So make sure you read that section of your textbook and be familiar with things like salience, direction, intensity, those kinds of things. All of those things affect how government officials react to public opinion. What I want to spend some time looking at right now is something that I call the attributes of public opinion. And there are three things that we're pretty sure about when it comes to public opinion. Remember, public opinion is the aggregate or the combination of a whole bunch of individual beliefs that make up public opinion. And the three attributes that I want you to be familiar with about public opinion are that public opinion is usually uninformed, inconsistent, and non-ideological. Now what that means is when I walk down the street, if I was to conduct a public opinion survey about nuclear proliferation amongst third world countries, most Americans are going to be uninformed about it. Most Americans are going to be ignorant, which means they know nothing about the topic because the topic doesn't mean anything to them personally in most cases. Now, be careful that you understand when I say that public opinion is uninformed or ignorant, I don't mean everybody is ignorant about a particular topic. What I'm saying in general, most Americans are going to be ignorant about most public opinion issues because we as Americans care about issues that impact us and care or know very little about issues that do not impact us. And if I am a construction worker, or if I'm an English professor, or if I'm a barista at Starbucks, I probably am not spending a whole lot of time reading newspapers or watching stories about nuclear proliferation, so I'm going to be uninformed. And that's on most issues. If I am a nuclear physicist, then of course I'm probably going to be informed on nuclear proliferation because it's something that I care about and I know something about. The second attribute about public opinion is that public opinion is inconsistent. And what that means is today I may care about an issue or have an opinion about an issue, whereas 3 days from now maybe I don't care about that issue anymore because something more important has come along. And this idea of us as Americans being inconsistent on public opinion is not unique. Americans, human beings in general, are inconsistent. When we're asked questions about topics, we don't always give consistent answers. And the perfect example I'd like to give is, have any of you guys ever taken one of those personality surveys, either on a dating site or maybe you took a personality survey for your UI 100 class or something else? And if you notice in those personality surveys, they will ask the same question 2 or 3 times, but they're worded differently. And the reason they're asking the same question 2 or 3 times, but it's worded differently, is because they want to try and make sure that you are being consistent in your responses. Because a lot of times we as Americans or as human beings will answer a question without really deeply thinking about it, and then the next time we have a question related to that topic, again, we haven't thought about it, and we may be giving a different answer. I may be asked today what the most important public policy issue in the country is, and I might say gas prices, because I'm getting ready to go on a vacation. But when I come back from vacation, I may now say that the most important public policy issue is health care because my grandson broke his ankle while we were on vacation and we had a hard time accessing health care. Public opinion is uninformed and inconsistent. And then the final thing that we'll say about public opinion is that public opinion is non-ideological. We don't think ideologically when we're responding to public opinion surveys. We very rarely respond ideologically about issues when our elected officials ask us how we feel about a certain public policy issue. And to understand what I mean when I say we think non-ideologically, we have to understand what the word ideology means. And ideology is simply an organized set of beliefs, values, and opinions that we use when making decisions. Any decision. If I'm thinking ideologically, I basically have a set of values, beliefs, and opinions that are well organized that I use when I determine if I'm going to be in favor of a certain policy or opposed to a certain policy. That we as Americans do not all think ideologically. Instead of pulling out our little checklist when it comes to an issue, let's say that somebody asks me how I feel about taxes. If I'm thinking ideologically, I will think about how I feel about government, how I feel about free markets, how I feel about taxes in general. And I will answer that question based on that set of beliefs, values, and opinions that I've developed over my lifetime. Most of us don't do that. If somebody was to ask me how I feel about luxury taxes, the way I'm going to respond is not ideologically. I'm not going to pull out my little checklist. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, luxury taxes don't affect me personally because I don't have a whole lot of items that would be subject to luxury taxes. But now if I was to ask a very wealthy individual, how do you feel about luxury taxes? They're more likely to have items that would force them to have to pay high luxury taxes. And instead of looking at their ideological checklist to determine if they think luxury taxes are right or wrong, they would simply look at the fact that luxury taxes impact them personally, and they would give their answer based on their self-interest in relation to that issue. So when we look at the attributes of public opinion, that shows us that it's uninformed, inconsistent, and non-ideological, which means public opinion can jump all over the place in the matter of a very short period of time. We can conduct a public opinion poll and ask how people think about the Cape Girardeau County Commission today, and we could get a very specific answer about how they feel. Have a couple of things break in the news having to do with the county commission, and we can conduct that public opinion survey again a couple days later, and that results can be much different. Same things happen when we conduct public opinion surveys about, is the president doing a good job? Is Congress doing a good job? Should we open the pipeline from Canada? Should we allow Arizona to strictly enforce their immigration laws? How people feel about all of those public opinion issues change on a daily basis. So think about it. If you're an elected official and you're trying to use public opinion as the primary tool in how you decide if I'm going to vote for a piece of legislation or against a piece of legislation, or if I'm in favor of a certain policy or opposed to a certain policy, your life's going to be miserable. Because as an elected official, if I base my decision strictly on what public opinion is, public opinion changes often, it's uninformed, it's non-ideological, and we can say a lot of times public opinion is just wrong. So public opinion plays an important role in the life of our government officials, but it's not the only tool that they use. When we study public opinion and the attributes of public opinion, we talk about them being uninformed, inconsistent, and non-ideological. And students generally don't have a problem with the first two, uninformed and inconsistent. We tend to run into a problem of students understanding what we mean when we say public opinion is non-ideological. And to understand that, we need to have a good, clear definition of the word ideology and understand what an ideology is. An ideology is simply an organized set of beliefs, values, and opinions that we have about government and politics. Another way to say that is we generally will have if we have an ideology, we have a checklist of things that we believe about what government should do and what government shouldn't do. And if we're thinking ideologically, we use that checklist to determine whether a policy is good or bad, or whether or not a law should be passed or shouldn't be passed. And when we look at that, we have to realize that most of us like to claim that we think ideologically. Oh, we're opposed to taxes because, it's wrong to take money away from people that they've earned and give it to people who haven't earned it. That would be kind of an ideological statement. And we like to claim to have this ideology that we think in an organized way. But really, when we do the study and when we look at it, most Americans don't think ideologically. We don't pull out our little checklist every time we have to make a decision about a government action or a government policy. The very easy way for us to decide whether or not we want to support a policy or oppose a policy is we simply look at that policy and see how it affects us. And when we realize that most of us make our decision based on how certain government actions or policies affect us personally, we realize that we're not thinking ideologically. Because you very easily could have an individual saying that I'm pro-life, meaning that they're opposed to abortion because it's not right to kill. But at the same time, that same person who says they're pro-life on the abortion issue is in favor of the death penalty. And we may find out that the reason that they're opposed to the death penalty is because they have a cousin who they claim was wrongfully convicted of a murder, and they're sitting on death row. Now, there are some people who are pro-life on the abortion issue and pro-death penalty because they have sat down and reconciled the ideological beliefs. There are some, but most Americans can't explain to you why they would be pro-life on the abortion issue, but also pro-death when it comes to death penalty. Most of us do not think ideologically. There are three basic ideologies that we find in America, the most common ideologies. They're conservative, liberal, and libertarian. Most of us will claim to hold one of those three ideologies. Now, we're going to go into a lot more detail about those three ideologies in the next couple of minutes. But you need to realize that most Americans will claim to be really one of those first two. They're either conservative or liberal. Now, we have to be very careful here because a lot of times we as Americans will say that all Republicans are conservative or all liberals are Democrats. And that's not the case. There's a difference between belonging to a political party and holding an ideology. Because there are some Democrats who are very economically conservative. And there are some Republicans who are pro-homosexual rights. So we have to be careful not to confuse ideology and political parties. We're going to take a closer look at that later on in this chapter and when we look at the chapter dealing with political parties. But understand that most Americans don't think ideologically. And we as Americans are a lot of times confused about this because of our media. The media a lot of times takes this word ideology and they take it a step further and they start using the phrase ideologue. Okay? An ideologue, when we look the definition up in Webster's or some dictionary, an ideologue is simply a person who follows their ideology. The term ideologue is not a positive term, it's not a negative term, it's just a descriptive term. But the problem is our media, again, has taken that word ideologue, and they have created a definition for ideologue that's on the screen. The media, when they say that, Rush Limbaugh is an ideologue or Barack Obama is an ideologue, what they're talking about is an ideologue being an impractical idealist, somebody who takes their ideology to the extreme. There are those people that are way out on the fringes of the conservative or liberal ideologue. When we watch the news media, especially now during election times, they will throw this term ideologue out there. And the primary reason that they're throwing the term ideologue out there is because they're trying to show that the candidate they're supporting is so much more moderate than the person that they're opposed to. So be careful when you hear this term ideologue, because it is used many times incorrectly by our media. And let me give you some examples. Okay? When we look at these people on the screen, Joanne Emerson, Barack Obama, Rick Santorum, Newt Gingrich, we can put any number of politicians up there. Do you think these people are ideologues? If you watch the Sean Hannity or the Rush Limbaugh show, you would think that Barack Obama is this extremely liberal ideologue, that everything he does is liberal. Or if you were to watch Rachel Maddow or Bill Maher or any of those liberal shows, you might think that Rick Santorum is this conservative ideologue that wants to, turn this country into a Christian theocracy where everything that he does as president is directly related to biblical principles. And we as Americans are sometimes led to believe that these politicians are ideologues. Because when Barack Obama was debating John McCain was calling Barack Obama a liberal ideologue. And Barack Obama said, that's okay, you're just a conservative ideologue. Again, they're throwing these labels out there of ideologues to show that, or try to show, that I'm much more moderate than my opponent. And I'm going to show you here in a few minutes that no elected officials, or very few elected officials, can afford to be an ideologue. If Barack Obama was as much of an ideologue as the conservatives make him appear, he would never get elected. If Rick Santorum was really as conservative as some people are making him appear, there's no way he could even consider getting elected. So understand that these elected officials can't afford to be ideologues. Now look at this next screen. Are these people ideologues? Rush Limbaugh, Bill Maher, Glenn Beck, Rachel Maddow. Are these people ideologues? I would argue that yes, they probably are. Because if you turn on Rush Limbaugh's talk show, Rush Limbaugh is going to be talking the conservative point of view, and not just the conservative point of view, but the extreme conservative point of view. Rachel Maddow is not just going to be talking about, slightly liberal issues. She's going to be talking way out to the extreme left. And why are these people able to be ideologues, but our elected officials can't? Very easy explanation. Rush Limbaugh, Bill Maher, Glenn Beck, Rachel Maddow, they are not running for public office. They do not have to worry about who they make mad. Now, Barack Obama does have to be careful. If he's too liberal, he's even going to offend some Democrats. Rick Santorum, if he goes too extreme to the right, he's going to alienate some moderate conservatives. So these elected officials cannot afford to be this media's definition of ideologues, extremists. They can't afford to be these impractical idealists or extremists. These entertainers can afford to do it. So be careful as we're watching these elections that we're going through right now. Make sure that you realize, and I'm going to show you here in just a few minutes, that these people that are running for public office, they're really not as extreme as their opponents making them appear. And make sure you understand what an ideology is as opposed to an ideologue, at least the media's definition of what an ideologue is.